Hello and welcome to the Horror of Netflix. Once again I'm joined by
Martin Yates.
And we're here today to talk about a film that is very near and dear to both of us.
Re-Animator.
Re-Animator.
H.P. Lovecraft's Re-Animator.
H.P. Lovecraft's Re-Animator starring Big Jeffrey Combs.
Jeffrey Combs.
Great guy.
Yeah, the
horror, not me personally, maybe a total bastard.
The horror industry's Jim Carrey. I always think.
Very underappreciated.
Yeah, he's
or is that Bruce Campbell? Is he?
I'd say Jeffrey Combs looks like Jim Carrey a little bit more.
That's true. Has there been a movie where the two of them have been in it, Bruce Campbell and Jeffrey Combs? If not, why not?
Are they not both in Escape from LA?
That's possible.
It's a sort. I can know Bruce Campbell's in it. It's the sort of film Jeffrey Combs would be in as
well.
Just
kicking about
yeah, but
in the background.
I can't remember. If
there is a Re-Animator Army of Darkness crossover
comic, isn't it?
Yeah. But anyway, this movie, great movie. Made glow-in-the-dark syringes very fashionable. It basically stars Jeffrey Combs as a kind of maverick,
young, budding mad scientist.
Yes, essentially who, through various research of his own, comes across this Re-Animator solution that can essentially bring dead flesh back to life to a capacity.
Imperfectly, however. His idea is that it will allow people to cheat death and that it will prolong life, but what he actually finds is, you know, he tries it on corpses, but within that time the brain tissue is rotted and it just leaves behind screaming madmen that have no capacity to reason. They're not, would you call it a zombie film? I don't know if you call them zombies. Very like zombies, rotten flesh, run about screaming, but they're never, obviously never referred to as zombies. They don't eat flesh, but they are violent.
Yep. There's also
there's no sort of bite and it turn them into, you know, there's no kind of contagious element.
I think what's difficult as well is
more of a Frankenstein
there's
story.
No continuity between the zombies. Like some of them can do crazy shit compared to other ones.
Yeah, there's that's probably something we should come into a bit later on. But
I think it's a movie that famously had a head performing oral copulation
or about to. It gets interrupted at a crucial moment.
Those pesky protagonists.
Yeah.
I fucking love this movie. It's great.
It's a brilliant film.
We went to see the musical.
There's a musical version. It's absolutely amazing. I don't know if it's still on the road. We saw it at the Edinburgh Festival, and the director Stuart Gordon actually directed the musical as well, and it's very, very close to the source material. Fantastic.
Go in the front row. Get covered in fucking.
But also the Netflix version. Well, not the Netflix version. The film, which is on Netflix, is fantastic. I really enjoy it. It's just got a great vibe. It's funny, but it's also really gruesome. It
feels very. There's quite a warm feel to it.
Yeah, although it's really quite depressing in a lot of ways and quite violent, and lots of people die in it. It's got a kind of a vibe that's similar to something like Creepshow. Yeah. That kind of comic strip.
It's very much 1980. I mean, it's got that 1980s horror film, but it kind of transcends the B movie. And I think the beautiful thing about it as well is it's very aware of itself.
It's very well performed. It's a very good script. It is very aware of itself. There are a few inconsistencies, like when you would come across the creatures don't all behave the same. Some, when he injects it into a full body, the full body gets up and attacks, and they can kill it just like a normal person. But when he injects it into individual limbs, they crawl around like a voodoo zombie that unkillable sort of thing. So there's a few, but I think really they were going more for a kind of cool vibe and a interesting. Yeah,
there's no. You shouldn't look at the science behind it or the biology,
rather than a kind of very detailed plot-driven story. It's like something like Suspiria. There's huge holes in the plot, but you watch it for the style, you watch it for the vibe, you watch it for the overall feel. It's not. I wouldn't say it is kind of plot-driven, this one, but it's not something that you'd pick into too deeply. It's
bright, clean, glow-in-the-dark liquid. That's what performs
it's comic
the magic
strip style. It's it is a visual comic strip, but it's a good film. It's funny without being ridiculously funny. Now, it's similar in a way to another film, Return of the Living Dead. Which in its vibe. Return of the Living Dead is a much-loved film. I'm not the biggest fan of Return of the Living Dead, but I like Re-Animator more. I think it's a smarter script.
I like Return of the Living Dead.
Do you?
Yeah,
I don't mind it. I found it a little bit, I don't know, too much screaming and running.
There's a lot. It's very much. It's almost like an Abbott and Costello film.
Yeah,
in that sense, it's very kind of hammy, but there's also bits as well that are pretty grisly in it too.
Re-Animator is a more intelligent film. It's the sort of film that, although it really appeals to horror fans and to gorehounds, it also it's also quite critically acclaimed. Critics like it as well because of the tongue-in-cheek elements. It is an adaptation of an H.P. Lovecraft novel, or actually an H.P. Lovecraft serial. I think it was a serial.
Or was it a novella? Was it not like it was not a short story?
It was serialized in Weird Tales, I believe. Right. But then collected into like a novella maybe kind of length thing, and then thereafter put in with Lovecraft short story collections mostly. But although it does take a lot of elements, the Herbert West character, the Bruce Abbott's character, I forget what he's called again, the guy, those characters are taken from the H.P. Lovecraft and the university they're at. It's moved to the present day, Miskatonic University. It's moved to the present day, although in fairness, Lovecraft was set in his present day, so that's fair enough. It adds a lot of humour, which Lovecraft obviously wasn't well known for his humour. There was some
Oh, Cthulhu's falling over again.
there was some Lovecraft did have some humour in some of his works, like he took the piss out of some other authors and took the piss out of himself a bit sometimes, but he didn't use the kind of humour that you have in the movie. He certainly didn't have love interests and sexual elements in his books.
Probably more necessary for the time and the brand of the movie.
I'd say what they do with this is they take the H.P. Lovecraft and mix it up with sort of a bit of 1950s horror comics, and then again take it and mix it up with kind of 1980s sci-fi, not sci-fi, kind of 1980s horror sci-fi kind of stories, and the mad scientist, a bit of Frankenstein as well, although that was also present
modern
in the original. And then when you put that all together, I think it's quite a magical mixture.
I think the changes are for the better as well. I mean, stuff like you said, like the love interest is good. Not a love interest for Herbert West, but there's a parallel character to Herbert West. It's another doctor, which is quite good because essentially you've got the kind of Herbert West very morally questionable doctor who's completely and utterly consumed with his own quest, and then you've got the other doctor who's very much like, he just wants to save people, and he constantly questions the morality of it. And it's interesting to see the two of them kind of ultimately working together at points, but at constant crossroads. And the love interest on the kind of more moral doctor kind of only emphasises the fact that Herbert West is a mad bastard.
But at the same time, he is a cold bastard, and he is in some senses almost a villain in the story. But he's not. I don't think Herbert West is a bad man. He's not. He's not evil. He's not out to harm people. He just is all about science. He just wants to further science, and he's blinkered to that. He doesn't really care about what the consequences are. And although ultimately there is a guy who does emerge as the villain, and becomes a severed head that molests women with his mouth, but and Herbert West is kind of forced into a heroic role. So I think it's quite an interesting thing, because you get to this character, you think he's the villain, and he is kind of like almost an archetypal villain at certain points, but the circumstances put him into a role where he ends up
because I think because the bad guy is almost kind of on this kind of pursuit of like fame, of trying to just better his own. I think, whereas Herbert West is always the pursuit of science.
In a way, Herbert West and this other guy are quite similar, because they're both like the scientific hubris that they both have. But this other guy's
bit of a quack.
Yeah, and he's also trying to plagiarise West's research. And it's interesting. It's good that there's the kind of the personal drama, the medical drama. There's a bit of this Quincy style people trying to there's the science fiction kind of 1950s sci-fi thing of competing scientists. There's like the kind of lowbrow comedy, the sort of sexual and scatological humor. There's slapstick. There's gore. There's sort of philosophical stuff, neurological. There's highbrow and lowbrow all mixed in together. There's like some really, really grotesque gore in the film. But it never becomes gratuitous, although it's really quite full on. It's never sort of repulsive, because it's always played with like tongue in cheek, similar to something like The Evil Dead. It never really goes into the
Evil Dead 2, probably.
Yeah, maybe a little bit,
because it's got that kind of edge to it.
It doesn't quite go as far as Evil Dead 2. It's sort of somewhere between Evil Dead 2 and Evil Dead 1, I would say. But Definitely worth it. It's more of a. It's basically a Frankenstein's monster meets Night of the Living Dead meets 1950s science fiction. It's brilliant.
It's brilliant. It's great. One thing I'd be interested to know is how many people actually know it. Because I know there's a lot of horror fans that know it quite well, but I think there's a lot of people normally, if you would say Re-Animator, they wouldn't have a clue. But it's also one of those titles that immediately puts people off.
Yeah, I think it is fairly well known as these things go. It's not as well known as like Halloween or whatever, but I know a lot of people that have seen it. I think most of the guys watching this will probably have seen it. If they haven't, go out and see it now. But it is one of those films.
Stay in and see it now, I guess.
Yeah,
that's the beauty of Netflix.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah. But it is one of those films that people who don't like horror, people who love horror are always going to love it. But people who don't like horror, provided they can stomach it, will also like it because it's smart enough and kind of knowing enough and funny enough that it's got mass appeal, I think.
Definitely.
The sequels, what do you think?
Two sequels. Bride of the Re-Animator
and
on
Netflix. Though?
They're not, possibly on the Americas.
The third one was at one point.
What's the third one called again?
Is it Beyond Re-Animator?
Where he's in a prison.
Is it Beyond? Because there was
Bride of Re-Animator.
Bride of Re-Animator.
Which they should have called Re-Animate Her.
And was it Beyond Re-Animator, the third one? Or
I think
was
so.
Beyond Re-Animator the proposed fourth one? I can't remember. Oh no, House of Re-Animator.
Oh, it's Re-Animator Forever.
No, yeah. Re-Animator Returns.
That's it, Re-Animator
Robin. They're actually both pretty decent in their own way.
Yeah, it's the third one is kind of like, the second one kind of keeps on a kind of a tangent path. It kind of feels similar to it.
The second one picks up with most of the same actors.
The third one feels cheap though.
Well, I'll come to that in a minute, but the second one picks it as most of the same cast.
Yeah.
It has Bruce Abbott again, it has the guy that played the villain again, David Gale or something like that, I think it is. And it carries on a plot line from the end of the first film.
It kind of expands.
It goes a little bit more Evil Dead 2, a little bit wacky and a little bit outrageous, but it's good fun. It's not as clever as the first one. The third film has Herbert West many years later. The third film was made about 20 years after.
Yeah, and you watch it and you're like, what's happened to Jeffrey Combs? What have you done with him? Who's this guy?
The guy looks exactly the same.
He does not.
He looks exactly the same.
He looks 20 years older.
He doesn't look 20 years older.
He does look 20 years older.
No, here we go. If you watch the opening scene of Beyond Re-Animator, and you've got the scene where he's being arrested and he's sitting in the car and he's got his shirt on and his glasses
doing his normal to see him,
and it's like there's Jeffrey Combs from 20 years ago, and then later in the film he does look older, but he's supposed to be in prison for like 10 years by that point. But they've made him up to look exactly, in the opening scenes he looks exactly like
Why
he did.
Why didn't they leave it like that?
Because he's supposed to have been in prison for 20 years or 10 years.
You said he didn't age.
Why
did they age him?
I don't okay, right. But it's not a bad film, but they shot it in Spain, and you can really tell. Not that I've got anything against Spain, but there's almost a kind of, it's good and it's funny and it's quite clever as well. There's some bad dialogue in it, and I think a lot of the actors, again, this will maybe tie in with the other review that we shot today, giving away our secrets here. The Cube, which a lot of the, I think the screenwriters and the director didn't speak English as their first language, and with Beyond Re-Animator, I think a lot of the actors didn't speak English as their first language, so there's a lot of quite bad dialogue, quite bad delivery. Jeffrey Combs is brilliant, the other guy's not bad, but there's that element to it, and there's also the other element where it's set in a prison. It's still set in America, but suddenly inside this prison, everyone else, Jeffrey Combs and the guy that comes to visit him, but everyone else is Hispanic, and it's like there's almost a kind of there's unfortunate kind of racist element that raises that everyone in the prison is Hispanic, and it's purely because they shot it in Spain and just used Spanish actors. But so it does feel cheaper, but at first it doesn't seem quite as good, but as it goes on, it breaks out into the usual Re-Animator kind of hijinks and kind of redeems itself. So it's the weakest of the three, but it's still very, very watchable.
First one, watch it.
Brilliant. First one, none of them come close to breaking it, but all three are worth watching, I think.
The only thing I would say, the thing about it is it had a 4K transfer, so they've tried to do a really high quality transfer, but I think it's ultimately kind of been hobbled by its production at the time because it's very grainy transfer.
Yeah.
But that kind of adds to it in a way.
Well, you're capturing with that kind of, you're transferring from film to digital. The grainier it is, the more you're capturing the film experience, isn't it? If the 4K is high enough resolution to capture the grain.
It's the kind of film that adds to it.
Yeah.
And I think it kind of gives it further onto that
I think part of why the second film and certainly the third film don't have the same vibe is that they're shot in really nice, clean stock, and they're film stock's smooth and flat, whereas the first film's got gritty. It almost it contributes to the comic strip vibe because it almost looks like comic print. It's got that kind of, you know.
The first one's very cult, but I don't think when they were making it, you don't get the vibe that they expected it to be anything like what it was.
I think maybe the money men weren't putting in. If the money men had known how big it was going to be and how good the film was going to be, they'd probably put more into it. But
God damn you, money men!
Money men. No, but it's a brilliant film.
Yep, go and watch
9 out of 10, easy.
Yeah, probably one of the better horror movies on Netflix.
Yeah, you'd be a sucker not to watch it.
Not too much competition. Goodbye.
See ya.